Hello, and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers. Hello, empaths. Welcome to the show. Boy, do we have a treat for you today. Our guest is Laura Day, the New York Times best-selling author and intuitive consultant trusted by billion-dollar companies and some of Hollywood's brightest minds. In her new book called The Prism, 7 Steps to Heal Your Past and Transform Your Future, she shares publicly for the first time the deeply personal story behind her work. Drawing from a challenging early life and decades of intuitive practice, Laura has developed a practical, step-by-step method to heal the past, transform the present, and consciously shape the future. Today, our conversation is about intuition, resiliency, and turning life's hardest experiences into real, lasting change. We're going to discuss why your ego isn't something to be killed, but something to be tuned, why insight isn't a consolation prize for not taking action, and how a woman who helped the world find its magic finally faced her own dark family history to find her own. Laura, we're so excited to have you back on the show to discuss this very impactful book, where we're going to talk about the 7 specific points in our development that form our prism. And the first one is called The Foundation Story. And so I was wondering if you could start us off there with a little bit of insight into your foundation story.
So it's really funny is every interview, and of course this book came out in April, so I should be used to it. But every time I do an interview, I block out the fact that I wrote about myself in it. I mean, it's just, Cleopatra, Queen of Denial. I come, as many of us do, I come from an extremely abusive background, also an extremely confusing one. My mother was a manic depressive who attempted suicide regularly and was hospitalized regularly. My father, who was a very well-regarded physician at New York Hospital Cornell, was also a violent narcissist. And we lived in an apartment alone. I'm the oldest of 4. 2 of whom have suicided, but we lived in an apartment alone from the time I was 5 years old, which means there were 3 younger children there from the time I was 5. And in this, it was a very confusing upbringing, because on one hand, we from third grade on went to private schools, and but there was no food at home, and there was no supervision, and you could never find 2 of the same socks, and people didn't buy you gym shoes, but there was a demerit for not having, it was just it was a very confusing upbringing. And, in many cultures, a 5-year-old taking care of younger children, there are people who came before you who did that. So they're examples. But in my socioeconomic group, there weren't. So, it's funny, as an adult, I've spoken to neighbors. I lived in a place called Peter Cooper Village, and there are these big, big buildings full of people. And I've, spoken to people who were adults when I was a child, and they would tell me the things we did, and I thought, wow, so much kindness was around us. Like, thank God for community. In the last, I guess, 11 or 12 years, 2 of my siblings suicided. My mother suicided. My uncle suicided. I mean, it's, trauma begets trauma. And I'm very deeply hoping that this next generation has to break that generational trauma. But I asked myself, because not only did I survive, unlike most of, I lose my voice when I talk about this, not only did I survive, unlike a lot of my family, but I have a wonderful life. It is true that I wake up every morning in terror, because is my mother alive, and who needs what? And then I remind myself, oh, wait, you're in your clean, dry bed. with a refrigerator full of food in your beautiful home, with your wonderful career, with your loving husband, your son, thank God, is well and happy. How, after the suicide, the sibling suicides, we call them, I really asked myself, why did I survive? And what I realized was that intuition, so the same thing that's wrong with my brain, the lack of filter, gave me this, gave me an eye before I was old enough to have an eye. You know, when you're a child, it's not I. You don't have an I. You are an extension of your surroundings, really, until age 7. And so you have your genetics that makes you unique, but you don't have an I. You take as real what's around you. I remember the first time I went into therapy and I told my history to a therapist, very deadpan, because I was, I don't know, I was 15. And it was like, this was my life. It wasn't like, oh my God, this is my life. I have to remind my mother to put on clothes and now she's dead and blah, blah, blah. We don't have food. No, this was my life. And I remember this so clearly because his face went white. And it was really not helpful for me because you got to be the hero of your own story. This is my 7th book. And the raison d'etre for this was that I was given as an intuitive a gift uh, of being able to bring through a life-saving process without it even becoming part of me. I mean, it kept coming through, but people confuse wisdom with intuition. They're very different. Have no wisdom, just have intuition. And I put it down on a page, and actually I write about this in the book, but it was a funny moment when I'm always writing 5 books, hostage negotiation for lovers using the FBI techniques. And, one about separations and how we have transitional objects even as adults, like all these books. But what I had started this one with was the same Einstein quote that was on my brother's memorial card that his ex-wife had chosen. And when I saw it, I took it as a synchronicity. And so this book, in a way, prepared me for the death 2 years later of my sister. So that's the long and short of it. And I live this book. I mean, I wake up in the morning and I say, where is the structure I was given faulty? And I just told you, number one is I wake up in terror. Now I could live the whole day like that, but I don't. I have my prism revising, my ego revising process that reminds me, oh no, that's not who you are. That's not where you are.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that because whenever we see you online or in interviews or, with
I have lipstick on.
celebrities, it just looks so fabulous and beautiful and exciting. And you would look at you growing up, I'm assuming in your private school with your, super intelligent father in this beautiful apartment building in the city, not even knowing that all of that was going on. So it's such a good reminder that we should never allow our insides to judge someone's outsides.
And
I was
also, where you start is not where you decide every day where you end up. And I am not saying it's easy. I hate those processes that say click your heels 3 times and you're in Kansas. It doesn't. It's blood, sweat, and tears. And it's always blood, sweat, and tears with the joy of it as well. Because when you're able to manifest what it is you want, all of a sudden the blood, sweat, and tears is just grist for the mill, as Ram Dass said. But people underestimate how gifted every single individual is, and that a miracle really does take a moment. And that's the lesson of the prism.
What I love, love, love about everything that you just shared is that you really exemplified there are no socioeconomic boundaries to trauma and dysfunction. And having grown up with some difficult things in my childhood, I didn't realize it until I started to see other people's worlds, because you don't understand when you live in that other people aren't experiencing what you might see something different in it. But jumping to your book, The Prism, that's what I love about this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your address was. It doesn't matter what's in your bank account. Your process and your steps can apply to anyone at all, because you're talking to humanity and the soul being, which is fantastic.
And I also like, when I write a book, I write it for the person who doesn't have access to mental health care, who doesn't have access to proper nutrition, who doesn't have access to support. I write it for those people because our abilities and also our communities. And once again, it's not the whole community, it's your ego that filters this is useful, this is not. So that work, that prism work, reforming the beliefs and ideas and patterns we have, but it's in the interaction. Like we're taught, look inside and you will find the answer. And that is so self-defeating for most people because the answer, if you could find the answer inside, you wouldn't be asking the question. The answer is in interaction. And it's in stepping into the world because we all live in a different world and your world was determined by those first 7 years of life. But there's a whole other world that has everything you want, which is why in the Prism, I have people start with their goals and not their be better goals. We're all told how we can be better, thinner, fatter, younger, prettier, blah, 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 blah. No, what do you want? What are you because hunger, what are you hungry for? Because hunger is a real mammalian motivator. And we are first and foremost mammals. You got to work. I always tell my students, you got to work with that mammal. But I've seen, one of the things I hate about the whole expert culture is I do these events at Soho House. They're 1 hour. And because I get bored, if I want to teach, I want to be in a community. I want everyone to be as weird as I am. So wherever I go, Paris, Rome, New York, Chicago, Soho House gives me an event space. And in 1 hour, I have complete strangers telling each other details about the other person's life that they have no way of knowing and doing healing. So directing their energy to heal someone else's life. We all have this, but it is in the interaction it happens. And often it's in the merging, the over being sloppily empathetic. It's in the merging and it's in the thinking and looking inside that keeps us from action. And it's in action that we meet change. I didn't fall in love because you know how they say, oh, you gotta work on yourself before you fall in love again. I think that is the biggest piece of BS we're fed. And it's indicative of so many other pieces because actually, no, your wounds match someone's gifts. Your gifts match someone's wounds. You get together and your baggage won't fit through the door. It's in a sense, getting what you want, taking the actions to get what you want that you change.
Yeah, there's a quote by Stephen Schwartz, who helped out with the remote viewing program. And he was talking about the success their participants had in interacting with each other. And he was asked, how did you teach them? Like, how did you do this with just random people and teach them to remote view and be intuitive? And he said, we didn't teach them. We gave them permission.
That's right. Absolutely. And, often because again, what the Prism taught me is my belief from my early childhood led me to replicate the same situations dressed differently. And it's not just giving permission. Sometimes you need to push. Part of what I do in my boot camp trainings is I push the students out of their comfort zone. I rough them up a little because otherwise they will stay in their comfort zone of being polite, of being right. That comfort zone doesn't help anyone. We all agree on the surface. One thing I asked today, my group, and it was probably, I always react in the past to what's going to happen. It was probably just being exposed to both of you. But I said, guys, ask, we're like 190 people on this morning. Ask for what you need. Who has a new book? Who's looking for a job? Ask for what you need. They couldn't do it. And they had to be pushed. No, don't say I have a book. Say it's available at. The title is, here's my link. And we don't know because of patterning, again, those first 7 years of ego development, we don't know the language to use in a world that the world responds to us in a positive way with. That was a terrible sentence. And that's what the prism is. And I've had to learn too. This is one of my favorite stories. But interrupt me, because remember, you may remember I have ADD, so I will talk for the entire time.
No, go ahead. We want to hear your story.
So before this book came out, and it's the first book I've ever really done press for, that I wanted to do press for. You know, I have an adult son. I didn't have a reason I needed to stay home. A friend of mine, staying with my friend, and he says, "Couldn't you at least pretend to be friendly?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, I find your friends' wallets. I talk to their dead mother. Like, I'm perfectly friendly." He said, "No, you're not." And I was really baffled, because I am friendly and I care deeply. And I said, "Oh, okay," because this is a brilliant, top Hollywood agent, brilliant man, like really my writer. I said, "What does that look like?" And he said, "For example, you walked into the kitchen this morning. There were 5 people there. You didn't acknowledge a single one of them. You just went and made your coffee. For example, unless someone asks you something, you don't ask them anything. For example, you can pause and look at everyone and just smile. For example, and he gave me a new prism, a new structure. It completely changed my book tour. I made lifelong friends. Some of the interviewers have actually stayed with me in New York. Everyone chipped in to help. Not only did I make everybody so much more comfortable and acknowledge them, because I always assume people know what I'm thinking, but they don't. It made me more comfortable, because there was a world I was connected to, not a world up here, but a world here that I was connected to. So it really changed my life. And the fact of the matter is, we're not defective. We just don't have the information. And that's why I wrote this, because I realized with such gratitude that my very porous intuitive brain that goes everywhere and goes on and really walks into walls sometimes, also allowed what I needed to come through. And I wish I had had this down as a book to give to my brother, my sister, my mother. But I do have it to give to other people and to teach. And the wonderful thing about teaching is I keep learning it as I teach. You know, my students are my best teachers, and they will call bullshit on me so quickly. You know, they're on live with me every day, and some of them since the beginning of COVID. They will call, "Yeah, you know, nice line, Laura Day. We're not buying it here." I mean, they're intuitives, so that in the direct messages they give detail.
But you're open to all of that. You're open to that feedback, which I think is so important, because a lot of people aren't. And I think it's indicative.
Oh, come on. So I'm
Well,
defensive sometimes. Like someone will say, "Oh, you're this," and I'm like, "No, I'm not." But then 3 days later, I'll have to apologize and say, "I'm sorry, I shut you down. You hit a nerve." You know, I mean, listen, we all defend our old ways of doing things, and that's why we get ourselves in the same trouble over and over. And that's also why we often don't get what we want in life, is we think we're doing something new. You can't think, I'm sure I said this the first time, can't think outside the box, because you are the box.
So as you're speaking, it's just really resonating with the fact that the need for community right now is so strong. And your book wouldn't have been as accepted. People weren't ready for your book if you had put this out at the beginning of your career. And now you're giving people, take just one step. You're not asking them to completely reinvent their lives in one full swoop. You're saying, take one step towards who you are and who you're becoming, instead of living where you've always been. Because it's much easier to stay where you've been. It's uncomfortable as hell to step out of it.
It only takes one step to revamp your entire life.
Exactly.
I mean, it really does. I mean, bumping into my husband revamped my entire life. And listen, when I first saw, I mean, he is truly the love of my life. But when I first saw him, I was like, "Nah, not interested. He's not my type." And my friend said, "Hey, maybe that's a good thing."
well, I think all of this is about accepting our ego. And so I would love to hear you talk about, because I think a lot of empaths in particular look at the ego as, oh, that means I'm vain, or the spotlight's going to be on me and that scares me. So how can we look at the ego in a friendlier way?
Well, your ego is your I. So it is, I covet, I'm jealous of, I hate, I destroy, but it's also, I love, I believe in, I share, I communicate. Without your I, you're just a mass of undifferentiated energy and you can't really do anything to anyone. You know, everyone talks about spirit, but spirit is our totality of energy. It doesn't have direction. You're helping someone out has direction. You're creating a tool or giving someone a reading or carrying someone's groceries. That has direction. That comes from your I. Now, we're born without an I when we're born. And, you know, art shows that up until the age of 5 or 6, we don't have a sense of being separate from our environment as children. So our beliefs are given to us. Our I is given to us. And then around 5, 6, 7, what happens is you develop an observer. You develop a part of yourself. You develop a self, not a part of yourself, a self separate from your environment. And that's when you can have impact, when that autonomy happens. The rest is all revision. But part of the problem is, you know, for example, one of my ego development things is I am responsible. Well, I spent a life being responsible for everyone except for myself. You know, like really, if there was somebody who was having a nervous breakdown and needed to be hospitalized, that was my next house guest. You know, it's really important not to investigate those beliefs, but to find a modality like the Prism, a YouTube of someone who does what your goal is well, and act differently. And it's so your I is revised over and over and over again throughout your lifetime. And I mean, I've been doing lately, and I think it's because it's, you know, the beginning of the year. I mean, I'm a latecomer. It's a little past the beginning of the year. But I've been doing kind of an integrity reset. Like, wow, I was that person, and I'm not happy I did those things. I'm not happy I was that person, but real tools give real results. I need to accept that. And here are little pieces that still pop out that I want to be aware of, that I don't want to do. And it's hard to do those resets. And what did that mean? For example, I had an argument with my husband who kind of broke a pact we had. And I realized, oh, wait a sec, this doesn't really have integrity. We're at a different place in our lives. There's another way I can do this. I first said, which ego center? Because each part of ourself really dictates, and it follows the endocrine system, really dictates that result in the world, our health, but also how we experience life. So I went to that ego center, and it was the third ego center, which coincidentally my Instagram group is working on. And it was really about drive and control and cooperation. And I thought, I don't want to be in control here. I need to take care of my part in this, but I can look, does this have integrity for me? Third ego center. And so I did it differently this morning. But it's not, again, they're gestures, and that's what I'm going to live all day. So that's the question. As I do things all day, I'm going to say, does this have integrity for me? So I was going to invite somebody to lunch. I'm taking myself to lunch on my date, which I have almost never done. I mean, I met my first husband when I was 16. So I'm taking myself to lunch, and I was going to invite someone, and I thought, no, wait, what has integrity for me is being able to just think this is worth doing for myself, and feeling maybe shy and embarrassed, and having people think, oh, well, I guess no one wanted to eat with her, and like dealing with all of those tangles that come up, and applying it to everything else. Does this have integrity for me?
I love that. And then taking action towards it. That's
Absolutely.
so important.
So to jump in a different direction, because we've already discussed how this applies to everyone. This isn't just oh, you're into woo-woo, or you've been through a lot of shit, or whatever it might be. This is just being a human being on the planet. There's going to be trauma. End of story. But it depends on.
But some people, now this isn't for everybody, because some people have the ego qualities already of being resilient, being flexible, and being strong. And we'll need those different qualities at different times. You know, some people did have really solid first 7 years, really good genetics, and developed that ego resilience where they can, you know, reform their I easily because they have the foundation. I would say, you know, 70 to 80% of us, and I'm making up that number, might be higher, might be lower, don't. And this is for those people. And it wasn't always the fault of our caretakers. And, you know, what you're working on is really easier to find than you think. You just scan from the top of your head to the base of your spine, and you notice, where do you feel stuck? And then you go to that part and you do something differently. That simple.
It's perfect. And it's useful. It's good to have a usable tool that you can actually apply to your life, because Samantha and I both work with a wide variety of folks, and there is a definitive line with people that get stuck in where they've been, and they let that define them. And you're giving them a tool, if they choose, because it's always choice and free will, to say, I don't want to feel this way anymore, and I'm ready to, hey, bring more integrity into my life.
And you brought up such a good point, which is it's really, you'll feel differently when your life changes. Like there are a lot of techniques that are geared toward making enduring your pain more possible. And I'm very anti that. Or going into your trauma. When you go for what you want, your trauma is going to come up anyway. No need to invite it into your house. So feeling is, in fact, change. Believe me, doing something that was within my integrity but out of my habit did not feel good this morning. It felt very scary and risky, and it made me actually a little angry, because that's what happens when I'm scared. I get angry. It's, you know, feeling is not is rarely the best indicator. The results are.
Yeah. And as you talk about in the book, the micro shifts that we can take each day, and they build. Something else I like that you mentioned in the book is how you say our vulnerabilities are actually what make us extraordinary. Can you give us an example of that?
So yes, my vulnerability, I have a very severe ADHD. And I just went about 8 years ago for a full neuropsych evaluation, because I thought, well, wait a sec, with my ADHD, if I'm hospitalized for a broken hip at my age, they're not going to think ADD, they're going to think dementia. So, you know, if I don't know what year it is. So I have this fairly recent neuropsych eval on my phone. And if with my ADHD, I remember to show it, I won't be put in a dementia ward. So my brain is scattered. An example of this is in high school, for example, I went to a public high school called Stuyvesant, and it was a very big building. I couldn't find my room. Every day, every class, I would be confused. That it was full on tension to just find where my room was, even after a complete year of going to second period in the same room. So my very defective brain that can't orient itself in space and time also is able to travel in space and time. And because I clearly had a big survival instinct, it's given me my career. You know, I'm a terrible dinner date. I can't remember the name of the vice president. I don't know what's happening in current events, because current for me could be a year from now or 10 years ago. You know, I can't orient myself. On the other hand, at a dinner, I'm having the conversation where we're both crying and we're deeply connected and forever we become friends. So your pathology can become your potential. Your strengths are also your potential. But we tend to find what we're ashamed of. I mean, the memoir that I wrote in this book, I'm ashamed of that. And I work on that shame. because I didn't know it was weird until I got much older. I mean, this was my home. This was my family. This was my life. I woke up in wet sheets every morning because traumatized children, don't have normal sleep cycles. And I wet the bed until I was probably 12 years old. That it's like so much, rape, like all these things that I felt as shame once I was in a world that wasn't the isolated world of family, that now I see are strengths because I can speak to people who have been through these experiences or other experiences that I can't even imagine, because you listen to what some people have been through and you're like, wow, I won the lottery. Or even people who had seemingly wonderful lives, but had a parent die early, or had a very ill grandmother and empathetically didn't have an ego to be able to make a boundary, and took that in, or someone who was just organically afraid, neurologically afraid of the dark. And that, it's not always that you've been rape, beaten, and starved. Sometimes it's something that wasn't your caretaker's, that was just part of the way you were made. And what's wonderful is, as adults, we have the ability to do things differently, not ourselves, but by connecting. Like in interviews, I learn so much from what people ask me that I didn't even, that I can put in my life and say, wow, let me try this on. As long as it's safe, I try it. Let me try this on. And one of my favorite examples is my friend Demi Moore, who's she's just into understanding and being open, which I'm a little less into. I was complaining one day and she said, well, don't look at it as why is this happening to you, but what is this doing for you? And I was like, oh, vomit, please. But then 3 days later, I thought, oh, yeah. And now I use it in all my workshops because I tried it on. I'm a terrible example of being open. My first response to everything is no. Like a lot of people with PTSD. No, I don't even want a different kind of cheddar cheese. No, or a different kind of wrapping. These slipcovers are 35 years old. Change? No. And then I give it a beat. And because I know this process works, I try it on, because it's not just using this process. It's mentors come in when we have goals, mentors come in, and in weird ways, someone you sit next to on the bus. On my dead brother's birthday, which was February 7th, I was sitting in the sauna in the spa on Duane Street underneath my building, and Happy Birthday to You came on. And I thought, oh, let me remember. I don't need to mourn him. I can celebrate him.
It's a great reminder.
All of this points towards, it's not a comparative study. Your trauma, my trauma, Samantha's trauma, whoever is listening's trauma. We can't say yours is worse or mine is better.
Worse. Mine was worse.
But I think all of this seems to point towards looking back, because I've been really open about this. I have chunks that are blacked out that I don't remember. And that's cool. But lately, doing a lot of theta-based work, those memories are coming back. The meditation, the healing, but the point of all of that is I'm able to look at it with a compassion I never felt. Instead of the shame, instead of the self-recrimination, instead of why didn't I, or could I, or should I, it's a compassion for who that person was at that time. And I think that's what your book is pointing towards.
And go you, that you repressed it.
Yeah.
So you could handle it.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm like, go you, that you did the right did the right thing. And the important thing is you have to be the hero of your own story.
100%.
The perpetrator should not be the hero.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, when you experience something differently, there's a lot of reframing. For me, what's important, and like remembering is important to some people because it contextualizes your life. Like for everybody, they're different things. I'm trying to write memoir now, and I realize I found myself so interesting at 40. I find myself so not interesting at 66. I find the world interesting. I find you interesting, but it's hard. I used to like be so steeped in memoir, but now it's like, but it's so important to be the hero of your own story, and to deal with things in the way that make your best life. You know, you deserve your best life. And everyone says, yes, I have to grow to be worthy. And look at all the unworthy people who get everything they want. You don't have to grow to be worthy. You do need, though, to open your blinders, to have people and things and books and catalysts to open your blinders so you see this whole world you didn't know existed.
Yeah, I think that's what's so hard for intuitives. I've always talked about if you look at the really well-known intuitives, they all have significant trauma in their childhood. And I've always believed that's kind of what turns on our sixth sense stronger for us is needing to be tuned into the moods of our caregivers, and really have that extrasensory perception. And yet, that difficult childhood often teaches us to play small, which means we push our intuition down. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Would that be an example of a prism distortion, an intuitive who's like, yes, I do have all these inner knowings in this world within, and yet I just want to go to my 8 to 5 job and not be seen as weird? Would that be a prism distortion?
Yes, well, the reason that intuitives tend to have traumatic childhoods is they didn't form an I. So they're merged with everything else. Like they couldn't be in the moment. It was too traumatic. They didn't have a structure. So that lack of structure actually affects you neurologically. You don't have a framework. So whatever you're with, you become. It's one of my favorite lines from David Levitt's The Language of Cranes. He's speaking about this baby in this home that the police come to, and this child is going, "Mm," and that's the only sound the child makes and the only gesture. And it's because in this privation, the one beauty was this construction site outside the window and this crane. And so, and the line is, what you love, you become. And in our childhoods, what we love, we become. And if we have healthy childhoods, what we love is supporting us and modeling for us appropriate being in the world. In an unhealthy childhood, in a traumatic childhood, there is no model. You're just responding. There is no I that develops, or very little I. No I, you wouldn't be functional at all. You wouldn't be able to go to that job that makes you small. And it is ego work to form an I. And again, often, like I do have an ability to understand people who are so different than I am, and to take them in and to be intimate. But that same ability also can make me hold on very tightly to control, because there was no structure or support, or very little structure and support in my early childhood. So really what the prism work is, and what the ego work is culling out the good. You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Culling out the good and addressing the things that get in the way of our goals. So not going back into your past and reliving everything, but saying, okay, right now I want an amazing relationship, or right now I want abundant funding for my business, or right now I want a job that I can do in my pajamas. Right now I want really amazing, friends who are supportive, having goals. And then you do the things, you contextualize your life in terms of those goals. And when trauma comes up, it's something to be dealt with, not a place to live. And I think a lot of people, especially, I'm 66, so my generation was the generation of the adult survivor of. And people identified, and people would come into my workshops, and I was young. I was in my 20s and very, even less tactful than I am now. And they'd say, well, I'm an adult survivor of, an alcoholic parent. I'm an adult survivor of this. And I'm like, is that how you choose to identify? Identify meant something different in the 70s. Is that how you choose to identify? Because I choose to identify as a caring, beautiful, successful woman and I wasn't that yet, who people want to be around. So, we do choose who we're going to be, and then we have to do the work of being it. And that takes new information. Again, the answer is not inside or not accessible, or you would have answered the question. And it's interesting because we all have all these gizmos. You go on Instagram and you could literally spend $20,000 on gizmos that track your energy, and people don't believe in energy. It's like, guys, wake up. We're
So
spending
true.
all this money and we can track our own energy. You just notice, where are you blocked? Where are you in pain? Where are you strong? Where are you motivated? And it will take you to your teachers. And sometimes your teacher literally is just walking to work a different way and bumping into different people, or wearing a color you never wear. I wrote an article about that, and people react to you differently. Our teachers, our resources are in the world, and they are abundant. Even in the most deprived area, there are abundant resources. There were people who opened their door to 4 children for dinner. We'd split up the building and we'd show up at different houses. There were resources to be had, not in the way, not at the dinner table, but at other people's doors. Those resources exist for us all. Whatever you need, make your goal. And then notice who does it well, or use a system like the Prism and become it.
Jumping back to what you said a few minutes ago, I remember saying that to my adult son one time. He was really struggling. He was in his, I don't know, mid-20s. And I looked at him and I said, you're just not hungry enough. And he got all, and I said, no, you need to want this. You need to really want this for it to change the direction that you're going in. And probably 3 or 4 years later, he came back and he said, boy, did that piss me off when you said that I'm not hungry enough. I didn't even know what the hell you were talking about. But then he said, after I look back at it, he said, it was exactly what I needed to hear. I wasn't hungry. I was marking time. And I think so many people forget that we're here to grow and evolve and learn and experience and have this richness to our lives. It just doesn't end with a chronological age or where you
That's
are on the
right.
planet.
And we also have no choice because our environment doesn't stay the same. Our cells don't stay the same. I mean, if you look at the chart of, your cell turnover, your body like renews itself all of the time. So what you put in your mouth today, you are going to be 5 years from now.
Right.
And it really, we don't have a choice. Change is there. And what we tend to do when we don't reach our goals is we tend to fight change instead of being realistic about change and finding tools outside of ourselves, again, to adapt to it. Because change is guaranteed. And our resistance, as mammals, and we are first and foremost mammals, change equals risk. Change equals danger. It is normal that we avoid it, and yet there is only change. So why not have that change take you someplace better? And it this morning on the Instagram was amazing because people really, I wrote a book. I just asked everyone to help each other, and you're giving them no information, like you don't even know how to ask. And we worked on that. We worked on that till people put up their websites, and I need you to take it to your libraries, and I do art, and I guess I should be coming on these lives with my art website. With my art Instagram. Yeah. It's really, but we don't see what we don't see. We don't know what we don't know. But our teachers are there. And we are a teacher for everyone. I mean, it really does change your orientation in the world and your welcome in the world. Like my friend who told me to just pretend to be friendly. It changes your orientation when you realize that every single situation, person, dynamic you encounter, you are a teacher for. And you can be a good teacher, you can be a not so good teacher, but when you realize that, it's it's not just very empowering, it makes you a part of something. I remember when my sister died, because it was 2 years after my brother died, and which was many years after my mother died, all by suicide. And at first I felt, because I am very close to my dead sister's husband, and I felt like, oh, wait, I've been excommunicated from a whole family, which luckily ended up not being the case because I put the work in, and so did they. But I asked, one of my goals was, I want to meet my family in the world. And since most of them are dead, like my birth family, I want to meet my family in the world. And I really did. And every once in a while, I go back to wow, 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 poor me. But then I just I have a friend named Parisa. She is literally, I don't know how I could even bring in a more caring, loving, generous friend, my Demi, Kevin, like all of these people, my friend Jeannie from Jack and Jill Nursery School, friends, that was over 64 years ago. And, it's, it's quite amazing. It's really quite amazing how when you make a goal, it comes in a way you would not have expected. Because, of course, you can only make a goal from what you know. You don't even know the wealth of possibility that is out there for you. When I started my career, I didn't know that people would actually pay for my weirdness. Um, and when I started, because I had a new baby and no way of supporting this person, and a huge expensive legal battle ahead of me with my ex, I was like, you know, I don't know, what could I do to make enough to pay this multi-million-dollar legal battle to have my son and to still raise him, and I made a goal of being a full-time stay-at-home mother with my son. And weeks later, I bumped into someone at a play space who was a top New York book agent while I was using my own system on myself. And Practical Intuition was a New York Times bestseller a year later.
Wow. Oh, that gives me chills.
I would never have thought of that. It would have even have occurred to me. I was thinking, what do I have to like sell? Organs? Like what do I have? Oh, it was really quite something. And then I said to a currency trader, I can't talk to you every morning anymore and do this because I have to get a job. And he said, I'll pay you anything you want. You make me a lot of money. And he did. It's you don't see what you don't see, and it really is all there, and it doesn't always feel good. And I think that is the thing that misleads us, that through shame, through grief, through not being enough, through not believing in it, whatever it is, as long as you do something in this overwhelming life, do a tiny thing differently, find someone who does it well, do something from that part of the prism, find a YouTube, talk to a stranger about it and take their advice as long as it's safe. A tiny thing different. You're in a completely different world.
Yeah, that's so true. You've given us so much to think about and so many good action-oriented steps we can take today. Before you leave us, what's an intuitive development exercise our listeners could try today that you tend to turn to on a weekly?
Um, oh, there's so many. One of the things I love is just bringing someone to my attention. And often there's someone in your attention and you shove it aside. and saying, why are they in my attention? Where are they? What color are they wearing? And just writing it all down, because the mind's a messy place. And then verifying it with the person. Often the person feels very touched. I mean, don't do this with someone who's going to feel like you intruded, because it actually works. But something to better your life is, first of all, when you wake up in the morning, you really need a transition from your sleep state to your waking state, because your sleep state is your regressed ego before you did all the hard work you've done. So a really important thing when you wake up is where from the top of your head to the base of your spine is your attention, and what feeling is there. And then what in your environment addresses that feeling in a positive way. So for me, I wake up with the terror I woke up with as a child. That is just, hopefully my practices will end that at some point, but it's a moment. It's ingrained in my neurology. And I wake up, if my husband's home, I smell him, it completely goes away. If he's not, I get out of bed. I don't lie in bed and try to get back to sleep. That's trouble. But I notice what does this need? And I ask it. So if it's here, I'll ask my chest, what do you need? And sometimes what I need is an egg. Like I listen metaphorically to the answer. Sometimes what I need is like a heavy blanket, those blankets that they use for, I with glass beads. Sometimes what I need is my coffee. Sometimes what I need is just to write. Sometimes what I need is to talk to someone. And luckily, I have friends in different time zones. So even if I wake up at 5, that's 11 in Italy. So really dialogue with yourself in that moment, or be prepared for that feeling. So I know that feeling is high cortisol, and I know what helps high cortisol is to, for example, jump up and down 10 times. Have something that addresses it, and then your intuition is clear to set the day. And how do you set the day? What's your goal for today? Goals frame energy. What you take in, it addresses your goal, and what you put out, so that there's purpose to the exchange. So have a goal and frame everything in terms of that. Don't be led by event. Notice it. Those are synchronicities. They tell you what's going on. But use events, use frustration to respond differently. Use loneliness to make connection. Use these things differently. Feeling isn't fact.
That's so great. Thank you so much. We're going to link up your website, of course, and your socials, but can anyone join your Instagram live?
Absolutely. They're wonderful, because my trainees, my boot campers, the way that I keep track of how their intuition is functioning is they do readings online. So people get lots of intuition, and we all get lots of healing. I mean, I know when my day doesn't start with doing healing together, it is not the same day I could have had.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is always lovely.
Yeah, and thank you for being so approachable. I mean, you're in a world that a lot of people don't live in, and I mean that not as a better, worse, whatever, but just the people that are in your friend group, the circles, the travel. That's not everybody's normal, but you normalize all of this, and it's so deeply appreciated. So thank you for being so genuine and true.
Thank you. But I also want to say that when it's not, Demi Moore or Nicole Kidman or someone, they don't write about it. But I have friends who collect trash and clean houses, and I've done all of those things. Well, maybe not collect trash, but I've cleaned houses. I've done all of those things myself. They're all, people look for meaning in life. They say, what's my destiny? What's my meaning? Your meaning is in whatever you're doing now. Treasure it.
Very much so. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
love that. Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. Be sure to check out Laura Day and her new book, The Prism. All the information is linked below and on our Facebook page, Enlightened Empaths. Remember, as always, to show up, do great work, and share your light.
Take care.